And we can say, Exxon, Shell, Citgo, you were responsible for this much carbon during that time. And so you should be responsible for paying this amount of the solution.
Hello, my name is Ryan Oates. Welcome to the Progressive Mass series about our policy agenda for the 2025-2026 legislative session. I'm here today with Dan Zackin, the legislative coordinator of the Better Future Project. Dan, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Ryan. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so we're here to talk about a bill in the Massachusetts State House, an act establishing a climate change superfund. Before we get into the specifics of the bill, I wanted to ask you about kind of the guiding philosophy of it. So this is on the Make Polluters Pay website. It says the principle of polluters pay is simple. Those who make a mess should be the ones to clean it up. So I'm wondering if you could expand on that and how it applies to climate change.
Yeah, so quite simply, we've had a couple decades of these companies using the atmosphere as an open air sewer. They have been pouring whatever they want out there. They have been largely unregulated and unaccountable for the damages that they're causing in the form of climate change. And we are the movement to hold them accountable and make them pay for the costs that they have imposed on the rest of us. And the really important thing there is that there's this fundamental question of who pays. And we've seen pretty consistently that if we don't make big corporations pay for the damages that they are responsible for, you and I are going to pay. Taxpayers across Massachusetts are going to pay in forms of higher taxes for projects, health bills when our air is unbreathable, and all of these awful other climate impacts that we know are coming our way.
Given that general principle, I guess maybe we can go into the specifics of what this bill does. So I'm wondering if you could give like a summary of what this bill does.
Yeah, happy to. So we are applying the Superfund precedent to the climate. Superfund is the first major polluter pays program on the congressional level in the US that said that if companies make a mess, if your factory is leaking toxic pollution into a river, you're on the hook to clean it up. We're applying that legal precedent to the climate to make the biggest oil and gas companies, companies that extract fossil fuels, pay billions over the next 25 years for the costs of climate resilience. And this is both to prepare our communities for the impacts that climate change will have on them, from fires to floods and so much more, and for disaster cleanup and recovery. So it gets both sides of that. Of that funding, 40% will go towards projects that directly benefit environmental justice communities, and there's strong labor protections throughout. And so the goal is that we can build a campaign around this bill that brings together labor, that brings together environmental justice and youth and public health advocates and your run-of-the-mill progressives and climate advocates like us to really fight hard to hold these companies accountable for the damages that they've caused.
And I totally agree that we need to bring in people from all walks of life and kind of have this wider coalition. I'm interested in so whenever we talk about companies having to pay for something, there can be a fear, I think, that smaller individuals are going to be affected, like smaller companies are going to be affected. Wondering like how do you decide who the mega polluters are? Who are these large? How do you decide that?
Yeah, so that's actually a really important point for why we're supporting this and not other solutions. For a long time, climate advocates fought for things like carbon taxes, which were flat, across the board, really easily passed on to consumers. And our goal here is not to say that we're going to put costs onto producers and have it come right back to us. We are only going after the biggest oil and gas companies that are responsible for over 1 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide or carbon dioxide equivalents over the years 1995 to 2024. And we chose that period because that's a period we have really good data for. And we can say, Exxon, Shell, Citgo, you were responsible for this much carbon during that time. And so you should be responsible for paying this amount of the solution. By only going after companies that are over that 1 billion ton threshold, we make sure we're not going after the whole market. And so for each company, if they say, hey, I don't like this, I want to pass costs on to consumers and raise the price at the pump so that gas is more expensive, they'll be undercut by other gas companies, by other oil producers, by the global market.
And there's a threshold. So there are many companies that will not be affected at all. And in competition, these are the companies that will drive prices down. So it's designed to make sure that the competitive pressures are still there, keeping prices down.
And if they all try and coordinate and raise prices together, then they're functioning as a cartel and can be prosecuted accordingly.
That makes a lot of sense. So, these companies have profited, right, from these emissions since the 1990s. And by having this price on the negative effects that their product has had, makes sure that the people that have benefited from these toxic things are the ones that are paying, not like individuals not being. That's really smart to have it designed that way. Okay. So my next question.
And sorry, one other bit. Um, the reason we're going after these companies, I think there's an argument we hear a lot. We're all polluters. I drove a car, I heated my house with oil. We used their products, we bought them. And there's a couple points there why it's really important to go after the big oil companies. First of all, they knew as far back as the 50s and 60s, and they lied about it for decades and actively worked politically to smother any alternatives from growing.
Did we aggressively fight against some of the science? Yes. Did we join some of these shadow groups to work against some of the early efforts? Yes, that's true. But there's nothing illegal about that. We were looking out for our investments. We were looking out for our shareholders.
And going back to 1995 is the year of the first COP, the Conference of the Parties, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And by going back to that, we're looking at a time when it was globally decided this was an issue that we needed to work on. And we're using that as the benchmark because that's when, even if they had not believed their own scientists, even if they had taken the most bad faith approach throughout, that we can reasonably say that they should have known better.
Yeah, I've seen like the internal documents at Exxon, the whole conversation about how our product is doubt, or doubt is our product, and that attempting to steer public opinion away from thinking about. So clearly by the 1990s, the science is very clear. And so that all makes sense. Another question about precedent is we talk about being a super fund. I've heard about super funds for like specific places. So for example, like DDT in Los Angeles, all these tons of DDT from their factory end up in the ocean. And then so it's like very clear, at this place, we need to clean up the DDT, and the people that profit are going to pay for it. With the effects of climate change being so broad, like how do you I guess how do you measure where that goes? Like how do you decide how to use it?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I do want to say I have some answers here, but I'm definitely the grunt organizer. If any of your audience is on the more wonky side, I would really encourage them to look up the research of Rick Heady and the Carbon Majors Project and the research of Dr. Justin Mencken from Dartmouth, who have really led the way and did the research that allowed us to pursue this legal path. We wouldn't be able to do it without them. Um, in terms of what's funded, it's written into the bill a pretty explicit list of what can be funded. And so you go into the definitions of what a climate change adaptation project is, and it includes things that you might think of like seawalls and improved stormwater drainage and flood controls, but it also includes a lot of references to nature-based solutions, which is really important. because we know with a lot of the hard infrastructure, instead of mitigating an issue, it often just passes it on. So, for example, when a huge storm hits a seawall, the energy doesn't just dissipate, it gets bounced down the coast and leads to further erosion later on. But if we invest in things like oyster shoals, rewilding coasts, potentially strategic retreat, um, we're able to do this in a sustainable way that will allow our communities to keep thriving, even in the face of runaway climate change. The other thing that's really important in there, there's a lot of language around preventative health programs, poor air quality, especially in urban areas, and um, reducing the urban heat island effect. Those are all really important for our environmental justice communities here in Massachusetts that suffer from heightened levels of asthma that are going to be exacerbated again and again and again by extreme heat events and poor air quality. I know last fall, I live in Jamaica Plain, and about 5 miles from my house in the Blue Hills, there was a brush fire that broke out. I could not tell you when there were last fires in Massachusetts, but this fall there were fires all over the place. And we have to start preparing, and we need to fund those preparations, and this is how we do it. It's going to look different all across the state. There's a pretty wide variety of threats that we face, from flooding to fires to increased disease prevalence to exacerbating pre-existing conditions, and it's going to be expensive work. And that's where making polluters pay is so important.
I live in Lowell, and we've had conversations. I'm on the Lowell Sustainability Council. We've had conversations about the heat island effect in Lowell, and like also the lack of tree cover. Well, I guess would that actually, now that that's on my mind, would that be something related to this bill? Like if we needed to build more tree cover to protect against the heat island effect?
Absolutely. Protecting existing forests, planting new trees, expanding urban greenery with green roofs and street trees, that's all able to be funded by this and is all really crucial to how we stay safe. Um, Another big part of it is weatherizing public, private residences, schools, hospitals, things that will keep our communities safe when we get extreme heat and also extreme cold. We talk about global warming a lot, but one of the major things that's happening is the jet stream is being destabilized around the Arctic Circle. And so we're getting these really extreme cold weeks in the winter, even if our average temperatures are climbing. And so making sure that our communities are safe and ready to deal with a -7 week is really important.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really glad you make that distinction. And also that you mentioned public health. I listened to a podcast recently about this woman whose daughter had been registered as like um, the first asthma death from climate change because of like pollution.
As a result of this, Ella is the first person in the world to have air pollution listed as a cause of death on her death certificate.
And so I'm really glad you're thinking also about the public health element of this. Okay, so given all these positive things that this super fund would be able to provide toward a more sustainable future, how can people help to support this bill?
Yeah, so up in Lowell, our 350 Mass activists are talking about passing a municipal resolution. This is a formal statement of support from a city council, board of selectmen, town meeting, and that is a crucial way we're building power around the state. There's, of course, the typical activist tactics that we can use. Call your legislators, ask them to co-sponsor, ask them to write a letter to the chairs of the Environment and Natural Resources Committee, Rep. Barber of Somerville and Senator Roush from Needham, a long district, Needham all the way down to like Mendon, I believe. Contact your friends that live in those districts, tell them how much we need this funding, and join our campaign. We have a pretty regular stream of webinars, trainings, and actions coming up. And if you go to polluterspayma.org, and I'll ask our friends at Progressive Mass to share this stuff on the Progressive Mass websites as well. There's so many ways to get involved beyond the typical legislator contact thing. I know that's not for everyone. If it is for you, though, we would love to have you talk to your reps, get them on board with this, and show up to testify when we have a hearing. So I hope folks are willing to pick up this torch and run. We've already seen a huge spike of excitement just in the last couple months alone. We had a great 100-person launch in Boston 2 Sundays ago. We had a Western Mass launch yesterday, March 24th, and the momentum's growing. We have labor unions, we have physicians and health advocates, we have youth, we have environmental justice advocates. Everyone's joining in, and you can too.
Dan, thank you so much for coming to speak with me. And I think, when I think about the future that I would like to pass on to the next generation, I think about wanting to have a healthy planet, but also, I think about economic justice and wanting to have a world that is economically fair. And so I think this bill progresses both of those ideas, and I'm really excited about it. So thank you so much for the work you're doing.
Thank you, Ryan. It's a big movement, and we need the organizers, we need the filmmakers, we need everyone.